Hi everyone, Bill Lethman here for Money Evolution. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about a recent article from the Wall Street Journal's Your Money section, where they're highlighting a young couple and talking about some of the financial difficulties that they're experiencing, kind of getting their start and starting to pay off some of the debt and saving for a house and things like that. So the name of the article, in case you want to look it up, is called Your Parents' Financial Advice is Wrong, or Kind of Wrong. And so what it really talks about is how a lot of the financial advice that we've been taught, or many of us have been taught over the years, to go to school, get good grades, go to college, even if you have to borrow some money to go to school, and then get a good job, and then work towards paying off that debt and saving for a house and starting a family and eventually saving enough money that you can retire one day. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and how maybe some of that financial advice kind of needs to be rethought a little bit. I'm also going to talk about how some of the decisions this couple has already made is part of the reason that they're kind of in this financial situation that they're in and some of the difficulties that they're experiencing. I'm also going to be taking a look at maybe how they can kind of dig their way out of this. Now, the article doesn't get into a lot of specifics about how much income they're making and things like that. So some of this we're going to just kind of throw some assumptions out there. But anyway, I think the framework that we're going to go through in this video should give you a pretty good idea of some of the things that you should think about as maybe you're starting to plan your life and maybe pay off some debt, save for a house, start a family, and things like that. So let's jump right into the article. This is the couple right here. So she's 32 years old and recently married. I think it said in the article they got married a couple of years ago. And probably the most alarming thing in this whole article is the massive amount, at least what I think is very massive, amount of student debt that they have. So they started off with about $165,000 in student loan debt. And now over the past 5 or 6 years or so, they've paid that down to about $140,000. So they are making, somewhat of a dent in that, but $140,000 of student loan debt is still a phenomenal amount here. And it says in this article here that she went to the University of Rochester for undergraduate, says that she went to Syracuse University for law school, and now is working as a regulatory attorney. And so it didn't really say how much money she's making there, but I kind of Googled it and looked at what a mid-level 5 to 7 years in their career, what they would be making. And it says, according to payscale.com, that it might be about $110,000 a year salary. So I don't know if that's accurate or not for what they're making. They live in Seattle, which tends to have a very high cost of living. So maybe or hopefully that's a little bit higher. But and depending on what kind of firm she works with, it could be higher or lower than that. But we're going to use $110,000 as we start to dive into some of these numbers and everything. So one thing that really kind of jumps out here, again, it kind of goes back to that decision making as you're starting to go to school and pick your university that you're going to go to. So I looked it up. Now, obviously, she graduated a number of years ago here, but in 2019, the University of Rochester, being a private school, is about $67,000 a year for tuition. And after aid, it says that the average student is paying about $26,000. So still a lot. So if you kind of just do some rough, extrapolation of that, maybe $100,000 of cost if she got that aid package that tends to be about the average over those first 4 years. And then law school, Syracuse University, is about $50,000 a year for law school. Again, she went a few years ago, so maybe it was a little bit less than that. But that could be another $150,000 in law school. So you're looking at a total cost of education for this couple, or actually just for her, of over $400,000. So as you're starting to make some of these decisions, and your decision to go to college and what college to go to and what career path you're going to study and majors and things like that, you're already kind of making some very major financial decisions that is going to affect you in cases like we're seeing right here, affect you for many, many years out into the future here. So, what are some things that they could have maybe done differently? So obviously one, very easily, maybe chosen a little bit less expensive school, especially if they're going to go to law school anyway. I'm not an expert on this, but it tends to be the law school that you graduated is kind of the most important thing, maybe more so than your undergraduate. Hey, I went to, such and such law school, and where you got your undergraduate from is maybe not quite as important. So she could have got an undergraduate degree from a less expensive school and then gone to maybe that Syracuse University and been able to kind of market herself out to the job market as having that Syracuse degree. The other thing is, of course, you could go to community college for a couple of years. So even if she wanted to graduate from the University of Rochester, going to school for 2 years, maybe having the opportunity to live at home, drastically cut down on some of those living expenses, the per credit hour expense, she still could have gotten that degree from the University of Rochester and maybe not tacked on so much debt there. So those are some decisions that you could be making there. And I think ultimately, I think any decision that you're making regarding spending money on a college education or any education for that matter, it could even be trade school, is you want to look at what is the investment that I'm going to have to put into this versus what am I going to likely get out of this. And I think everybody goes into college with the same kind of thoughts or expectation, at least I did, that I'm going to, I'm going to be at the top of the pay scale, and I'm going to be the one that's going to, really make it big, and, I'm going to be the one that's going to make, $500,000 a year. I think everyone kind of goes into it with that, but you got to kind of be a little bit realistic and think of what is the average, salary for that degree that you're likely going to get coming out of law school, and then weigh that against how much money you're putting in. Kind of a good rule of thumb, and actually they pointed out in this article, is you want to look and say if you're going to borrow $100,000 for school, whether that's for your undergraduate or that's for law school or whatever, your starting salary should be about equal to that. You should be starting out at about $100,000. And I think that's a pretty good rule of thumb, especially if you're going to have to tack on a lot of that debt. Okay, so obviously there's some things that they could have maybe done differently, but they're in the situation that they're in right now. So we can't go back and change the past. We can't go back and get a do-over for how much money they spent on college. But what I want to do now is I want to switch over to our whiteboard here, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that they could do right now. So in the article here, it says again that she's a regulatory attorney. Again, looking at payscale.com, it says that job for somebody that's maybe been in the market for about 5 to 7 years should be about $110,000 a year. Again, we have no idea. The article doesn't specify how much money she's making there. And it also says that her husband is a leasing consultant. And so I looked that up, and this could really mean almost anything. But I think on the low end there, they say a leasing consultant might make about $30,000 a year. Leasing consultants could probably make a lot of money depending on what it is that they're doing. They could be leasing high-end commercial space, or they could be leasing dishwashers or something. Who knows? So that could mean almost anything. So their salary together obviously is $140,000 a year. So we're going to look at that and we're going to say, okay, how should they be looking at this $140,000 gross income, and what kinds of things that they should be doing? Again, the article said that they're 32 years old. I don't think it said how old the husband is, but let's assume that maybe they've got some plans to start a family at some point, maybe in the next 5 to 10 years or so. So we want to get them into a good position to where if they wanted to start a family, buy a house and things like that, that they could be on pretty solid financial ground as they're starting to do that. So 32 years old, and then they're also living in Seattle, which is a very expensive place to live. And so they didn't say how much their rent was, but they did say they are trying to save money for a house. And they said it's very difficult for them to be able to put money aside for that down payment. So the first thing I think we want to do is we really want to address the student loan debt that they have. And again, according to the article, just coincidentally, matches up identically with what their salary is. So $140,000 of student loan debt. And what we want to do is ideally, my rule of thumb is to try to pay that debt off within 5 to maybe 10 years after graduation. Now, they're already, I think, 5 or 6 years into it after graduation, according to what I could kind of get out of the article and things like that. But if we start from right here, from this point, to try to get that $140,000 paid off in the next 5 years. So to do some of this math, and I've got some of these numbers already pre-calculated right here, if they want to pay that $140,000 off in 5 years, and by the way, I'm going to assume 6% for an average interest rate for those loans. Again, that could be higher or lower than what they're actually paying, but as of right now, that tends to be about an average that we see here. So 5 years, they would actually have to make about $2,700 a month. So that's like a house payment pretty much to do that. But $2,700 a month at 6% would pay off $140,000 in just 5 years. And if they stretch that out a little bit over 10 years, that would give them a little bit more cushion there, $1,554. So I did a little bit of extrapolation too, by the way, on what I think they probably have already been saving, because again, it's said in the article that they started off with $165,000 of debt. Now it's at $140,000. So I estimate that they probably have been making over $1,000 a month payment towards that loan, somewhere between like $1,000 and maybe about $1,200 a month. So, they have already put a pretty big dent in it. I'm sure the way that they're thinking right now is that paying $1,200 a month towards the student loan, that's a lot of money going towards it. But again, if they just continue to do that, it's going to take a lot longer for that to happen. Probably, somewhere, 12 to 15 years, as opposed to what we're going to shoot for here is to pay that off in 5 to 10 years, and that way, again, it's going to put them into a pretty good financial situation. So obviously, besides the student loans, they're going to have a lot of other expenses that they're going to have to pay. We're going to talk about each of these a little bit. So we're going to talk about some housing expenses. According to Google, the average rent in Seattle is about $2,130 a month. So I'm just going to round that up to about $2,500 a month, and hopefully they're within that average. If they bit off a little bit more than they can chew on the housing, of course, that's going to be one of those reasons that they're not going to be able to pay that debt off as fast as they want to, or be able to save for the housing purchase that they want to make down the road. So again, these are big decisions. They've already made the decision to take on that debt. Now we've got to see what are the decisions we can make right now to hopefully pay that off faster, get them starting to save for the down payment, maybe starting to save for retirement, and again, getting them in a good position. We're going to talk about cars. Okay, so they probably have to have some type of transportation. I'm not sure what that is. We're going to say that $1,000 a month should be a pretty good amount that should cover cars, and that should be the car payments or lease payments. Should also cover your insurance, your registration fees, fuel for the car, and everything, kind of an all-in. I think that's even a little bit generous there, kind of on the high side. We're going to say insurance, so I have no idea what kind of maybe health coverage they have or have to go out and get, but I'm just going to say $1,000 a month for that. And then we'd also like to see them start to save some money, so we're going to put $1,000 a month for that, and that way maybe around the same time that student loans paid off, maybe they'll have a pretty good chunk of money they could go and use as a down payment for the house. And then last, but certainly not least, I'm going to try my fancy board if I can raise that up so I can not have to bend down as much. We're going to have like basically entertainment, food, and that could also cover some of the other things like cell phones and miscellaneous, and we're just going to put that at $3,000 a month. So if we kind of add that all up, we're at about $8,500, and then plus the $2,700 or so that we have to do that. So that should be about $11,200. Okay, so their expenses, as we just calculated them right here with these estimates, about $11,200 a month. So now what we want to do is we want to kind of see, well, what is their take-home pay? How much are they actually netting out of each of those paychecks? And so I did a lot of this math here before, but again, they have $140,000 a year of gross salary. In the state of Washington, there are no state income taxes unless your income is over $200,000. So they get to save money there. And after calculating FICA taxes and running the standard deduction reduced from that $140,000 and going through the tax tables, they actually end up with about $112,290 is what their net take-home pay is. So we divide that by 12. That means that they're taking home $9,357. So not a big surprise that the article talks about some of the struggles that they're having because, they have a lot of expenses and they don't have enough income to maybe cover some of those expenses. So what we need to do is we need to kind of come back here and start thinking about, what we can maybe change or reduce a little bit. Now, it's easy for me to sit here and say, hey, I think you should cut this or you should cut that. But some simple ones, obviously, if they can make a housing decision a little bit cheaper in the interest of the long run and maybe being able to buy that future house, maybe they can cut a couple of bucks from that. Maybe they can reduce that from $2,500. Maybe they can take it all the way down to $2,000. Maybe they can take it down closer to what that average is, saving them $300. So we want to just take up pick up little inches and yards here along the way. The amount that we estimated for cars, I think, is very high. Now, it's probably driving a couple really nice cars, maybe on a lease, something where they're getting a new one every 2 or 3 years. So a couple things they can do. If they want to have one nice car, they could do that, maybe buy a less expensive used car. Living in Seattle, they might even have an opportunity to take public transportation, maybe even go down to one car. So I think this is an area that we can really save a lot. I think we can maybe cut that car expense in half if they're kind of smart about it and using some good judgment there. Insurance, that's a really tough one to say. I'm not going to say we can cut anything out of the insurance. If we had to, we might even take a little bit out of that savings here if needed to, but I still really like to leave that in there because, again, I think that long-term goal is to save for that down payment. And if they can continue to do that, $1,000 a month over that 5-year period, by the time that loan is paid off, if they can do it in 5 years, they're going to have $60,000 saved for a down payment. So that should be a really nice chunk of money to put down there. The food, entertainment, the miscellaneous stuff, that's going to be cell phones. There's a lot of stuff that comes out of that. $3,000, that may be tough to cut that a lot, but we're going to hope that we can maybe even cut that down to $2,000. And so basically when we look at this, we're only about $1,800 short. I think if we could just cut a few of those things, we're getting very close there. And I think that actually does add up to exactly $1,800 difference. And that should get them right on track or pretty darn close to being able to fund all of those lifestyle living expenses, the house, the car, pay for insurance, start saving some money, and then have a little bit for that food, entertainment, some of those miscellaneous things. But one very important thing, especially anybody that's in this situation where you're really trying to work towards a goal and pay something off, you're going to have to be very diligent with your budget. Really know where every dollar is going, how you're spending the money. And again, you've got that light at the end of the tunnel. When that 5-year period is up, you're going to free up $2,700 in your living expenses, and that's just going to be huge. It's going to feel like you hit the lottery almost, because almost everybody's financial situation would drastically improve if they all of a sudden got another $2,000 to $2,700 a month added to their cash flow. So anyway, that's the kind of way we're going to look at this. The next thing I want to do too is I'm going to kind of fast forward and start talking about how they're going to buy that house and what that kind of looks like, and maybe how that compares to the rental that they're in right now. Okay, so let's fast forward those 5 years and let's assume that they've paid off those student loans. So they've freed up some cash flow. Maybe they decide to stay in a rental for a few more years to continue saving for a down payment. Again, we're going to kind of go into the assumption here. Hopefully they've been able to hit their target, and by the time that 5-year period rolls around, they're going to have maybe as much as $60,000 saved for a down payment. If they wanted to keep their housing expenses about the same, which I think is going to be a very good idea, very smart idea to do, that should put them in a position where they should be able to afford a house between $300,000 and maybe as much as $400,000 per year. So again, I think one of the common things that a lot of people would tend to do is say, hey, we've just paid off our student loans. We've got $2,700 a month, especially if they go talk to a mortgage consultant or especially a real estate agent that's trying to sell them the most expensive home that they can. They're going to tell them, hey, you can actually afford a house that's $500,000 or $600,000 or $700,000, depending on what that income is. And also too, hopefully, speaking of income, hopefully that income is going to continue to grow. Hopefully it's going to at least keep up with inflation, or maybe there's some job improvements, some raises along the way that they might be able to get. So we're going to assume hopefully things are going to start to roll along a little bit better. And then of course, it's going to be, again, maybe if they're going to start that family, there may be some additional costs there. So keeping the housing expense, I believe, we're just going to use today's dollars. And of course, there's going to be some inflation in here that definitely needs to be accounted for. But if we say we're going to stick in that $2,500 a month range. So what I did was, kind of looked at the property tax situation for the Seattle area. Basically says it's about $10 for every $1,000 of home value that they have. So if you were going to look at, let's just say a $350,000 home, that's going to mean that your property taxes might be about $3,500 a year. So you got to definitely keep that. So that's almost another $300 a month that you need to factor in as you're starting to put together this budget. You also are going to have insurance on the property. no idea what the insurance is going to cost, but kind of a good rule of thumb, maybe even a little bit on the high side, might be another $100 a month for that. And then if we calculate a mortgage and we say we're going to do a 30-year mortgage, at about a 4.5% interest rate, that mortgage is going to probably be about $1,773 a month. So, we add that up, just the rough numbers there. This is going to put us in actually a little bit less than that $2,500 figure. So it gives you a little bit of buffer there to start thinking about. But again, this is kind of the big picture, and if you're at all in somewhat of a situation like this where you've got some debt, you're saving for some goals, and again, we haven't even really talked about retirement there, but I am a big believer that having a house and starting to build up that equity is going to be one of the best ways, in my opinion, to grow that wealth over time. But we definitely don't want to let the retirement factor get too far away from us. One of the biggest things about saving for retirement is the earlier that you can start saving money towards that retirement, you've got those extra years of compounding, and it really does make a big difference here over the long run. But let's kind of recap here a little bit about what we've talked about. So number one is you have to think about every financial decision you're making, and not only what does that impact today, but what is that impact going to be down the road. So in this case right here, kind of rethinking those student loans. How much debt are you actually taking on, and what does that debt payment thing look like? Because some of these numbers just purely look like fantasy. If you're a college student graduating and you're starting to think about $80,000 or $100,000 a year, you have really most of the time no concept of how much money that is and how long it's going to take for you to pay that back. And especially after you start looking at what that paycheck is and what the paycheck is after you pay some of your bills and your taxes and insurance and things like that, how much is really left over to put towards those loans may be a lot different than what you kind of have in your mind. And again, tackling that debt as soon as you possibly can is definitely better. It's better to be, kind of young and strapped a little bit financially than to have that debt lingering around, well into your 30s or into your 40s. And there's been no shortage of articles that I've read here recently about people. In fact, they actually just did a financial plan on somebody here not too long ago that had over $100,000 of student loan debt, and they were over 60 years old. So they're planning for retirement and at the same time trying to figure out how to pay this debt off. Now, they went to school later in life. There's a lot of other things, but again, as you start piling on some more of these commitments like kids and other things, it's really difficult to dig your way out of that. So anyway, this is going to be something I think we're going to do once in a while, a video like this where we kind of dive in, maybe take a little bit of a case study, kind of look at a situation, maybe analyze it, how we can improve it, some of the things to think about, and maybe as you're watching this, there's some things that maybe resonate with you and say, hey, that's an idea that I can use to pay off some of my debt or get myself a little bit further ahead financially. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe button. That really does go a long way to helping people find the channel. If you like this video and you like some of the other things, hit the share button as well. We want to get that out to as many people. Money Evolution is all about financial education. That's our primary goal here, and that's what we want to do. We want to get you more educated so you can make better and smarter decisions about your money. So with that, I'll see you back in our next video. Have a great day, and I'll see you then.